From the treasures of Olokun beneath the sea to the lightning crown of Shango, African gods of wealth and power shaped kingdoms, built empires, and still hold secrets about abundance today. But their names were whispered in shrines, hidden from colonial records, and erased from textbooks. They were too powerful to be forgotten and too dangerous to be remembered. Tonight, we will journey across Africa, from the shores of Yoruba land to the Nile Valley, from Igbo villages to the kingdoms of the Congo, to uncover the gods of fortune and power they don't want you to know about. In Yoruba tradition, wealth is not only a matter of earthly treasures but of cosmic alignment, and three deities stand at the center of this vision: Olokun, Shango, and Ogun. Together they form a triad of prosperity that is not only material but spiritual, shaping how communities thrived, how kingdoms were ruled, and how the Yoruba people saw their connection to the divine order. To speak of wealth in the Yoruba world is to speak of the sea, the storm, and the forge. Three forces that hold both blessings and dangers, three powers that, if respected, open the path to abundance. Olokun, the Lord of the Depths, is perhaps the most mysterious of the Yoruba deities tied to wealth. The ocean was never just water in Yoruba cosmology. It was a storehouse of untold treasures, a realm that both nurtured and tested humanity. Olokun governed not only the physical riches of the sea, but also the spiritual treasures hidden beneath its depths. Pearls, corals, and fish symbolize the material side of his wealth. But beyond that, Olokun's domain represented spiritual prosperity, peace of mind, and the kind of abundance that comes when one is balanced with their destiny. In Yoruba shrines and in diaspora traditions such as Santeria in Cuba or Candomblé in Brazil, Olokun is still revered as a god who provides not only riches but also healing and spiritual clarity. To honor Olokun is to recognize that wealth comes from the depths, not simply from what can be held in hand, but from the unseen mysteries that sustain life itself. Shango, by contrast, is the thunder that shakes kingdoms. Known as the god of thunder and power, Shango represents kingship, justice, and authority. His lightning was a divine reminder that wealth and leadership are never free from responsibility. The king who ruled with dishonor would be struck down, just as a corrupt judge would be exposed under the light of the storm. But Shango's lightning was not only destructive, it was also empowering. It symbolized vitality, energy, and the fire needed to maintain sovereignty and protect a people. In Yoruba society, to invoke Shango was to call on the very essence of leadership: the courage to rule fairly, the strength to defend the weak, and the wisdom to use power as both shield and sword. Even today, across the diaspora, drums are beaten in Shango's honor, thunderous rhythms that remind his children that power is sacred and must be wielded with justice. Ogun, the master of iron, stands at the foundation of work, industry, and progress. Unlike Shango's storms or Olokun's ocean depths, Ogun's wealth is born in fire and sweat. He's not only the god of war but also the patron of tools, blacksmiths, and laborers. For the Yoruba, Ogun's domain was the forge, where iron became machetes for farming, swords for protection, and tools that built cities and carved new paths. Wealth under Ogun's guidance was inseparable from labor and creation. He was the reminder that prosperity was not simply handed down from the gods but earned through work, skill, and sacrifice. Ogun blessed those who labored with integrity, and in turn he demanded respect, for to misuse iron was to misuse the very force of life itself. In the diaspora, Ogun continues to be honored as the god of roads, industries, and progress, showing that his influence has not diminished but expanded into every field of modern labor. Together, Olokun, Shango, and Ogun embody a complete vision of wealth and power in the Yoruba world. Olokun grants spiritual depth and prosperity from the hidden mysteries of the sea. Shango upholds justice, kingship, and the rightful use of power. Ogun lays the foundation for labor, progress, and the tangible tools of abundance. These three deities remind us that prosperity is never one-dimensional. It is spiritual and material, internal and external, communal and individual. Wealth without justice collapses into tyranny. Power without work becomes empty, and riches without spiritual depth dissolve into greed. The Yoruba gods of wealth and power still live in the hearts of millions across Africa and the diaspora, from Nigeria to Bahia, from Havana to New York. Their stories are not just myths, but living principles, blueprints for abundance that transcend time. To honor them is to remember that wealth is not only about what one has, but about how one lives, rules, and creates in harmony with the divine. In their thunder, in their iron, in their seas, the Yoruba gods whisper the same eternal lesson. Prosperity is sacred, and only those who honor it with justice, work, and balance will truly thrive. In the traditions of the Igbo and Akan peoples, wealth and prosperity are not seen as mere material possessions, but as the very fabric of life, tied to the land, the waters, and the sacred balance between human beings and the divine. To understand their worldview, we must enter a spiritual universe where every crop, every river, and every breath of fertile soil was animated by gods and goddesses whose blessings determine the fate of kingdoms. Among them, Allah, Idimili, and Asase stand as towering figures of abundance, each embodying a dimension of prosperity that goes beyond gold or power and speaks to the heart of what it means to live well and in harmony with creation. For the Igbo people, Allah is not only the earth mother, but also the supreme moral compass. She governs fertility, harvest, and the wealth that flows from agricultural abundance. Yet she also judges human conduct. To prosper under Allah's gaze is not simply to have full barns and healthy livestock, but to live with integrity. Theft, deceit, murder, and injustice are considered inso Allah, abominations against the earth herself. This intertwining of morality and wealth is one of the most profound aspects of Igbo spirituality. It teaches that true prosperity cannot be divorced from righteousness. The earth, as Allah's body, yields generously only when her children honor both her fertility and her laws. Communities would hold festivals in her honor, offering yams, kola nuts, and sacrifices not only to secure good harvests, but also to reaffirm the covenant that tied wealth to morality. For the Igbo, Allah was both mother and judge, provider and punisher, a goddess who ensured that prosperity was always earned in ways that upheld balance within the community. Alongside Allah, another goddess carried the mystery of riches not from the soil but from the waters. Idemili, the goddess of the sacred river, embodies wealth, mystery, and spiritual power. A symbol, the python, was revered as a sacred being, never to be harmed, for it carried her divine presence. The python slithering through fields or homes was treated as an honored guest, a living reminder that prosperity is not owned but visited upon those chosen by the divine. Idimili's waters symbolize fluidity and continuity of wealth, suggesting that abundance was not static but flowed like the river, sometimes generous, sometimes withheld, but always alive with divine intention. Offerings of palm wine, fowls, and other sacred gifts were made by the riverside to ensure that Idemili's blessings continued to flow. Her power was not only material but deeply spiritual, as she was seen as a mediator between the human world and the vast unseen realms. In honoring Idemili, the Igbo acknowledged that wealth is as mysterious and uncontrollable as the river itself, a gift that must be respected lest it be withdrawn. For the Akan people of present-day Ghana, the source of prosperity was Asase Ya, the great earth mother, who ruled fertility, agriculture, and the cycles of life and death. To the Akan, Asase Ya was second only to Niame, the supreme sky god, yet she was the one most intimately tied to daily survival. Farmers rose at dawn to pour libations into the soil, calling upon Asase Ya to bless their work. For without her favor, no seed could sprout and no harvest could be gathered. She was revered as the provider of wealth, but her wealth was rooted in the land itself, in the soil that sustained empires, fed armies, and crowned kings. The Khan rulers depended upon her blessings, and rituals of kingship often included invocations to Asase Ya, acknowledging that political power without her fertile abundance was nothing but an empty throne. She was also the guardian of truth, as oaths were sworn upon her name. To swear falsely upon Asase Ya was to invite disaster, for she would withdraw her blessings and curse the land with barrenness. What ties Allah, Idemili, and Asase Ya together is not only their connection to prosperity, but their profound insistence that wealth is sacred. For the Igbo and Akan, prosperity was not measured by coins or gold alone, but by fertile soil, full harvests, thriving families, and moral balance within the community. These goddesses demanded reverence, offerings, and righteous living. Their worship ensured that wealth was not simply taken but granted, not hoarded but shared, not stripped from the earth but given back to it in endless cycles of reciprocity. Even in the diaspora, their presence continues. Among Afro-Caribbean and African-American communities reconnecting with ancestral traditions, Allah is invoked as a moral earth mother, Idimili as a river of hidden riches, and Asase Ya as the foundation of agricultural and communal renewal. They whisper to us that prosperity without morality is empty, wealth without respect for the sacred is fleeting, and abundance without balance is ultimately destruction. In them, we see that African prosperity was never a mere pursuit of riches. It was a holistic vision where land, water, and morality converged into a single truth. To be truly wealthy is to live in harmony with the divine order. Allah teaches us that abundance demands justice. Idemili reminds us that riches are fluid and must be honored. Asase Ya roots us in the soil, reminding us that the earth is both giver and witness of all prosperity. In the heart of Central Africa, in the lands of the Congo and surrounding regions, the pursuit of wealth and power was never separated from the spiritual world. The ancestors and spirits were not passive figures to be remembered only in ritual. They were active participants in the shaping of kingdoms, the granting of prosperity, and the enforcement of justice. For the Congo people, wealth was not only material, it was spiritual authority, political legitimacy, and the ability to command respect across realms, both visible and invisible. At the center of this vision stood the powerful spiritual technologies of the Nkisi Nkondi, the mysteries of the Kalunga line, and the sacred invocations of kings who sought the blessings of the other world to secure prosperity and expansion. The Nkisi Nkondi Ramekisi among the most remarkable manifestations of this spiritual power. Carved figures, often studded with nails, blades, or other sharp objects, they were not mere idols but living vessels of force, charged through ritual and invocation. The Nkisi Nkondi were spiritual contracts in physical form, agreements between people and the invisible world, between kings and their subjects, between traders and their partners, and between ancestors and the living. When disputes needed settling or oaths required binding, individuals would approach the Nkisi Nkondi, drive a nail or blade into its surface, and swear before the spirit that they would honor their word. If they broke it, the Nkisi Nkondi would unleash its wrath, bringing sickness, misfortune, or even death. These figures thus became both guardians of wealth and protectors of justice, ensuring that prosperity could not flourish without accountability. In this way, they upheld the same principles seen across African cosmologies, that wealth must be tied to morality, that abundance divorced from integrity collapses under its own weight. Yet the Nkisi Nkondi were not only for contracts, they were invoked for protection against enemies, for blessings of prosperity, and for the health of the community. Traders sought their favor before journeys, hoping that their goods would arrive safely, and profitably. Families turned to them to guard against spiritual attacks or theft. Kings relied on them as instruments of authority, showing their people that the throne itself was shielded by divine power. In this sense, the Nkisi Nkondi blurred the line between the economic, political, and spiritual worlds, reminding us that in Central Africa, power was always negotiated with the unseen. This negotiation was symbolized most profoundly in the concept of the Kalunga line, the cosmic boundary that separated the world of the living from the world of the dead. To the Congo, this line was not a fixed wall but a permeable threshold, crossed constantly through dreams, rituals, and the invocation of spirits. The Kalunga line was often represented by water, the sea, rivers, or mirrored surfaces, reminding the people that beneath the reflective surface of life lay the vast unseen world of the ancestors. Wealth and power could not be secured without crossing symbolically into this other world. Prosperity was a gift that had to be negotiated, not merely taken, and kings and priests served as mediators across the Kalunga line, ensuring that blessings flowed from the world of the dead into the world of the living. The symbolism of the Kalunga also shaped how the Congo viewed kingship. The king was not only a ruler of men, but a bridge between realms. He was expected to walk the threshold, to seek guidance from the spirits, and to maintain harmony between the living and the ancestors. To ignore the Kalunga was to invite disaster. To honor it was to ensure that abundance would flow across generations. The boundary was not feared, but revered, a reminder that true wealth is sustained only when the dead are remembered and the living uphold their obligations to them. Kings of Central Africa frequently invoked these spiritual forces in their pursuit of prosperity and the expansion of kingdoms. When embarking on military campaigns or trade expansions, rulers did not simply rely on strategy or force. They performed rituals, consulted diviners, and called upon the Nkisi and Kondi for protection and binding oaths of loyalty. The Kalunga line was symbolically crossed to seek blessings from ancestors who were believed to grant victory, fertility of the land, and expansion of borders. Wealth from trade, especially in ivory, copper, and cloth, was consecrated through rituals that tied material gain to spiritual legitimacy. Without the sanction of the spirits, kingship itself was unstable, and no amount of gold or cattle could sustain a ruler who had lost the favor of the ancestors. This intertwining of the spiritual and the political reveals a profound African truth. Prosperity was never a private matter, never a purely material pursuit. Wealth and power had to be negotiated with the unseen world, balanced with justice, and consecrated by the ancestors. The Nkisi Nkondi ensured honesty and accountability in human affairs. The Kalunga line reminded all that the living and the dead were bound together in an eternal covenant. Kings themselves were tasked with maintaining this covenant, acting not only as rulers, but as custodians of spiritual law. Even in the diaspora, these concepts survived. The image of the Nkisi and Kondi echoes in the ritual objects of voodoo and Santeria, where nails, pins, and offerings still embody contracts and pacts with spirits. The Kalunga line appears in the Caribbean and the Americas as the idea of crossing waters to meet the ancestors, a reflection of both the Middle Passage and the deeper African cosmology. In these continuities, we see that the Central African vision of wealth and power did not die with colonial suppression, but adapted, endured, and still shapes spiritual practices today. The Congo and Central African spirits of power teach us that wealth is not secure without justice, that prosperity is hollow without the blessing of the ancestors, and that kingship without spiritual legitimacy is doomed to crumble. The Nkisi Nkondi's nails remind us that every oath matters. The Kalunga line whispers that life and death are not enemies but partners in sustaining abundance. And the kings of Central Africa, invoking these forces, remind us that power itself must bend to the will of the unseen. True prosperity, they teach, is not simply held in crowns or coffers. It flows from the eternal covenant between the living, the dead, and the gods who rule both realms. In the Nile Valley, wealth and kingship were woven together in ways that transcended mere possession of gold or land. To the Egyptians, true wealth was inseparable from divine legitimacy, from the blessings of gods who governed both the seen and unseen. No kingdom could endure without spiritual sanction, and no throne could stand without the sacred alignment between ruler and cosmic order. At the heart of this divine system stood three figures whose power defined the essence of kingship and prosperity. Amun-Ra, Osiris, and Ma'at. Together they embodied wealth as abundance, renewal, and balance, forces that ensured Egypt's grandeur for millennia. Amun-Ra was the god who fused the hidden with the revealed. Amun, the hidden one, had long been worshipped in Thebes as a mysterious and invisible force, a god whose true form could not be seen but whose presence permeated all existence. When Amun merged with Ra, the sun god, he became Amun-Ra, the supreme deity who embodied both the concealed mystery of creation and the blazing brilliance of the sun. This union gave rise to a deity not only associated with cosmic order, but also with kingship itself. Pharaohs claimed their rule through Amun-Ra's blessing, declaring that their crowns were not simply political, but divine appointments. Wealth under Amun-Ra was more than gold or jewels. Though Egypt was overflowing with both, it was the power to rule with legitimacy that no mortal could contest. Temples to Amun-Ra became treasure houses, overflowing with offerings, tributes from conquered lands, and the accumulated riches of trade. From Nubia's gold mines to the Levant's cedar and incense, tribute poured into Egypt under the banner of the god who guaranteed the throne. To give to Amun-Ra was to invest in cosmic order, ensuring that prosperity would not collapse into chaos. The pharaoh, as his earthly son, embodied this wealth, not as personal property, but as a divine trust for the land and its people. Thus, in Amun-Ra, kingship was wealth, and wealth was kingship, a cycle that defined the essence of the Egyptian power. If Amun-Ra embodied legitimacy, Osiris embodied renewal. Known as the god of fertility, agriculture, and resurrection, Osiris represented eternal cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Every year, as the Nile flooded its banks and spread its fertile silt across the valley, Egyptians saw the body of Osiris regenerating the land. The harvests that followed were his blessings, ensuring that Egypt remained not just powerful but self-sustaining. Grain, more than gold, was the true wealth of the Nile, and Osiris was its guardian. Osiris' story, the myth of his murder by Set and his resurrection through Isis, was not only about life after death, but about the guarantee that abundance would always return. Pharaohs often associated themselves with Osiris in death, believing that by merging with the god, they too would be reborn in eternity. In life, this identification tied their reins to the cycles of fertility and harvest, making them custodians of Egypt's prosperity. To govern without honoring Osiris was to risk famine, drought, and collapse. Thus, wealth was not measured only in treasures, but in the ability to keep the land fertile, granaries full, and the cycles of nature unbroken. Osiris, therefore, was the silent force ensuring that kingship was rooted not only in divine legitimacy, but also in the nourishment of the people. Yet even legitimacy and renewal were incomplete without the third pillar of Nile Valley kingship, Ma'at. Represented as a goddess with a feather on her head, Ma'at was the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic harmony. Without Ma'at, neither Amun-Ra's legitimacy nor Osiris's fertility could sustain Egypt. Pharaohs swore to uphold Ma'at, to govern with justice, fairness, and wisdom. They were judged by how well they maintained balance between rich and poor, temple and state, Nile and desert, life and death. Wealth under Ma'at was never allowed to drift into corruption or oppression without consequence. Pharaohs who hoarded riches or ruled with tyranny were believed to destabilize Ma'at, inviting chaos and eventual downfall. The weighing of the heart ceremony, where the dead were judged against Ma'at's feather, reflected the same principle applied to rulers. Wealth and power meant nothing if divorced from truth and balance. Only by ruling in accordance with Ma'at could kings ensure that their prosperity was lasting, that their monuments stood the test of time, and that their names were remembered as righteous. Together, Amun-Ra, Osiris, and Ma'at defined the divine architecture of Egyptian kingship. Amun-Ra granted the crown its legitimacy and filled temples with treasures. Osiris blessed the land with fertility, ensuring abundance in the form of harvests and renewal. Ma'at kept the entire system in balance, holding wealth and power accountable to truth and justice. Without one, the others faltered. Wealth was therefore not a possession, but a sacred covenant entrusted to rulers who were expected to steward it wisely for the good of all. This sacred model of kingship reveals a deeper truth about African conceptions of wealth and power. Unlike later systems that glorified material gain for its own sake, Egypt saw prosperity as a spiritual contract. The pharaoh was not free to rule as he pleased. He was bound by gods who demanded legitimacy, fertility, and balance. When these were upheld, Egypt flourished. Temples gleamed with gold, granaries overflowed with grain, and monuments rose in the desert as eternal testaments to divine order. When they were broken, dynasties fell, invasions came, and the land descended into disorder. Even today, the echoes of Amun-Ra, Osiris, and Ma'at remain. In their stories, we see lessons about leadership, responsibility, and the nature of true wealth. Prosperity is hollow without legitimacy. Abundance is fleeting without renewal. Power is corrupt without balance. The Nile Valley gods remind us that wealth is not merely possession, but stewardship, not domination but harmony with the divine. And perhaps that is why Egypt's legacy endures. Because its wealth was never only about gold, but about aligning human kingship with cosmic order. In the traditions of Southern Africa, wealth and prosperity were not measured solely in gold, jewels, or monuments as in the Nile Valley, but in the gifts of the earth itself, rain, fertile soil, and cattle. Here, abundance was both practical and sacred, rooted in cycles of agriculture and the strength of the community. At the heart of this worldview stood Nomkhubulwane, the Zulu goddess of fertility, harvest, and transformation. She was a figure of profound importance, embodying the delicate balance between human labor, divine blessing, and the natural world. To invoke her name was to call upon the rains that fed the land, the crops that nourished the people, and the prosperity that allowed kingdoms to thrive. Nomkhubulwane was seen as the goddess who connected the heavens and the earth, a divine mediator between the forces of nature and the needs of humanity. Her presence was tied directly to rain, for in southern Africa, rain was life. Without it, crops withered, herds weakened, and famine spread. With it, the land flourished, granaries filled, and communities prospered. Farmers offered prayers, rituals, and dances to Nomkhubulwane, recognizing that their labor in the fields could only succeed if the divine powers of fertility and rain aligned with them. She represented a vision of wealth that was not hoarded but shared. But when the rains came, the blessings fell equally upon all. Beyond agriculture, Nomkhubulwane was also tied to transformation and the cycles of life. She was believed to have the power to take many forms, human, animal, or elemental, reflecting her dominion over the diverse aspects of creation. This shape-shifting power symbolized the fluid nature of prosperity itself. Just as rainwater flowed and crops grew in cycles, wealth too was seen as something that moved, transformed, and renewed. Nomkhubulwane reminded the Zulu that prosperity was never stagnant but alive, bound to the eternal rhythms of nature. Alongside her divine role, the concept of wealth and prosperity in Zulu society was deeply tied to kingship and cattle. For the Zulu, cattle were more than livestock. They were living treasures, symbols of power, lineage, and spiritual connection. A man's wealth was measured in cattle, and the king's prosperity was demonstrated by the size and strength of the royal herds. Yet cattle were not mere possessions. They were sacred offerings, often used in rituals to honor the ancestors and the gods. Through cattle, the Zulu king displayed his ability to provide for his people and maintain harmony with the spiritual world. Kingship itself was steeped in sacred rituals that connected the ruler to divine authority. The king was not simply a political leader, but a spiritual intermediary who carried the responsibility of ensuring the prosperity of his nation. Sacred offerings, often involving cattle, were made to the gods and ancestors to secure rain, fertility, and protection. The prosperity of the kingdom was believed to depend directly on the king's relationship with the divine. If he upheld the rituals, honored the gods, and ruled with justice, the land would flourish. If he neglected these duties, drought, famine, or misfortune could strike. Thus, kingship was inseparable from prosperity, and prosperity was inseparable from the divine. These practices reflect a uniquely Southern African understanding of wealth. It was both material and spiritual, rooted in the fertility of the land and the blessings of the gods. Prosperity was communal, not individual, for the rains fell on all, the cattle supported families, and the king's abundance was tied to the well-being of his people. Nonkubu Wane's role as goddess of fertility ensured that prosperity was understood as a sacred trust, while Zulu kingship rituals underscored the responsibility of rulers to act as guardians of that trust. Even today, echoes of these beliefs endure. Farmers still look to the skies with reverence, acknowledging that rain remains a blessing beyond human control. Ceremonial dances and rituals honoring fertility and the land continue in many communities, preserving the memory of Nomkubulwan's power. In the cultural identity of the Zulu and other Southern African peoples, cattle remain symbols of prosperity and strength, deeply tied to heritage and ancestral memory. The legacy of Nomkubulwane and the rituals of kingship remind us that prosperity cannot be separated from balance with the natural and spiritual worlds. True wealth is not accumulation alone, but the harmony of human effort, divine favor, and the cycles of nature. It is a vision that challenges modern notions of wealth as isolated and individualistic, offering instead communal, spiritual, and ecological model of abundance. In Southern Africa, the goddess of fertility and the king of cattle stood as twin pillars of prosperity. Together, they taught that wealth is not merely about possession, but about stewardship, not about dominance, but about harmony. It was this vision that sustained kingdoms, nourished communities, and kept the sacred connection between humanity, nature, and the divine alive across generations. When Africans were torn from their homelands and thrust into the brutality of slavery, they carried more than their bodies across the ocean. They carried memory, song, prayer, and the presence of their gods. The chains of colonialism could shackle hands and feet, but they could not bind the spirit. In whispered chants, hidden rituals, and coded songs, the gods of wealth and power, Olokun, Shango, Ogun, and many others, crossed the Atlantic and found new homes in the diaspora. What began as survival in the face of oppression became the seedbed of resilience, giving rise to powerful spiritual systems that still thrive today. Olokun, the god of the sea and riches, was especially revered by enslaved Africans who crossed the waters of the Middle Passage. For many, Olokun became the guardian of those who drowned, the one who received the souls of the lost and preserved their memory in the deep. Yet he was also remembered as the god of abundance, of hidden treasures beneath the ocean surface. In Cuba, Brazil, and Haiti, Olokun remained a symbol of spiritual and material survival. To invoke his name was to call upon resilience, hidden wealth, and the ability to endure hardships while never losing one's divine inheritance. Even under the whip, enslaved Africans reminded themselves that wealth was not only measured in coin, but in survival, continuity, and memory. Shango, the god of thunder and kingship, thundered loudly in the hearts of the oppressed. His fiery presence, symbolized by lightning and drums, became an emblem of rebellion and resistance. In the Yoruba homeland, Shango was both a king and a god, embodying justice, strength, and the power to overturn oppressors. In the diaspora, enslaved Africans invoked Shango during secret gatherings and ceremonies, using drumming and dance to call upon his lightning force. His presence gave courage in times of revolt. His thunder became the drumbeat of rebellion, and his justice reminded the enslaved that oppression was not eternal. In traditions such as Santeria and Candomblé, Shango continues to reign as a god of kingship and empowerment, guiding communities to honor their heritage and claim their power. Ogun, the master of iron, was perhaps one of the most essential deities for survival. Among enslaved peoples, Ogun represented labor, tools, and the endurance of the worker. In the fields, on plantations, and later in cities, Ogun's essence lived in the iron of the machete, the plow, and the chains themselves, symbols of oppression transformed into symbols of strength. He was the god who cleared the paths, who forged the tools of liberation, as much as the instruments of survival. In Voodoo, Candomblé, and Santeria, Ogun is still revered as the one who empowers labor, industry, and the strength to endure. His presence reminded enslaved Africans that even forced work carried sacred weight, and that within every tool was the possibility of transformation and freedom. Through these gods, wealth in the diaspora was not seen only as material riches, but as the sacred art of survival, to endure, to keep traditions alive, to sing the songs of the ancestors even in foreign lands. This was wealth. The gods reminded their children that prosperity was measured not just in possessions, but in the ability to preserve culture, honor ancestors, and pass spiritual knowledge to the next generation. Today, the survival of Olokun, Shango, and Ogun in the diaspora is more than history. It is living proof of African resilience. In the streets of Havana, the temples of Bahia, and the cemeteries of Port-au-Prince, these gods are still called upon with reverence. They are honored in drumming ceremonies, invoked in healing rituals, and remembered in festivals that mix African roots with New World realities. They live in the songs, the dances, the offerings, and the prayers of millions. The story of these gods in the diaspora teaches us that wealth is not only gold, and power is not only thrones. Wealth is survival. Power is the ability to resist erasure. In preserving their gods, African people preserved themselves, their dignity, and their place in the world. It is a testament that no matter how fierce the storm of oppression, the divine flame of resilience can never be extinguished. Wealth is more than coins. Power is more than thrones. For Africans, true abundance was always spiritual, tied to balance with the gods. Across the continent and into the diaspora, wealth was measured not only in cattle, gold, or fertile fields, but in the strength of community, the blessings of the earth, and the justice upheld by divine authority. The gods of wealth and power, Olokun, Shango, Ogun, Allah, Asase, Ya, Amun-Ra, and countless others, were not abstract figures. They lived in the rain that fell, in the iron that forged tools, and the thunder that commanded kings, and in the cycles of fertility that sustained life. To honor them was to acknowledge that prosperity could not exist without harmony, justice, and sacred respect. Their legacy is still alive today. When people dance in Shango's name, pour libations to Asase Ya, or pray at rivers for Olokun's blessing, they affirm that true wealth is wholeness and continuity. These gods remain a living archive of African philosophy, reminding us that abundance is not only material but also spiritual, rooted in gratitude, discipline, and balance with the unseen world. In a society where wealth is too often defined by consumption and exploitation, their memory calls us to reimagine what it means to prosper. Now I ask you, which of these gods of wealth and power do you feel still rules today? Do you sense Olokun's depths in the ocean, Shango's thunder in the sky, Ogun's strength in the tools of progress? Share your thoughts in the comments, because your voice keeps this memory alive. If you've been moved by this journey, like this video, subscribe, and join our growing community of seekers reclaiming the spiritual truths that were hidden. And stay with me, because in the next video we'll uncover another mystery, the African goddesses of love and destiny. You will not want to miss it.